In the spring of 1816, the cane fields of Barbados whispered with secrets. Beneath the watchful eyes of overseers in the shadow of empire, enslaved men and women prepared for something unthinkable: open rebellion. Their leader was an African-born man named Bussa, and his name would echo across the island long after the smoke cleared. Barbados was the jewel of Britain's Caribbean colonies, a land drenched in sugar and stained in blood. The enslaved worked from dawn until collapse, their bodies fueling the wealth of empire. But beneath the chains and silence, resistance smoldered. Rumors of emancipation swirled, and frustration turned into fire. On Easter Sunday, thousands rose. Cane fields burned red against the night, plantation houses trembled, and for a moment, freedom seemed within reach. Bussa and his comrades struck at the heart of empire, proving that even on an island fortified by wealth and soldiers, the enslaved would not suffer forever in silence. The rebellion was brutally crushed. British troops unleashed muskets and cannon fire, leaving hundreds dead and the rest forced back into bondage. Yet the uprising could not be erased. The courage of Bussa and his fighters lived on, inspiring generations and carving his name into the foundations of Barbados's history. This is the forgotten history of Bussa's uprising, the story of how enslaved people defied the British Empire and lit a flame that still burns in the memory of a nation. Bussa's early life is veiled in silence. Like so many enslaved people, the records of his birth, family, and journey were never written by his own hand. What survives are fragments, hints, and whispers carried forward through oral tradition and colonial archives. Yet even through this silence, a figure emerges, a man remembered as a leader, a fighter, and a symbol of defiance. Historians believe Bussa was African-born. His name itself points to origins beyond the Caribbean, suggesting roots in West Africa where resistance traditions ran deep. To have been torn from that homeland and forced across the Atlantic would have marked him with both trauma and memory, memories of freedom, of culture, of identity. In Barbados, Bussa rose within the cruel hierarchy of plantation life. Records hint he may have been a ranger or driver, positions that required overseeing groups of enslaved workers in the cane fields. These roles carried risk, caught between the demands of masters and the suffering of laborers. But they also gave men like Bussa mobility, authority, and the ability to build networks. Such a position may have allowed him to move between estates, to gather information, to hear whispers, and to spread ideas. Authority granted by the plantation could be turned against the system itself. A man trusted with control could quietly prepare for rebellion. What is clear is that by 1816, Bussa was recognized as a leader among the enslaved. He commanded respect not through titles written on paper, but through courage and vision. Others saw in him the strength to turn whispers into action. In the cane fields and huts of Barbados, plans took shape. Bussa's name became a quiet rallying cry. He was more than a man. He was a reminder that even in chains, leadership and dignity could endure. By 1816, Barbados was a pressure cooker ready to explode. The enslaved endured endless toil under the lash, yet something new was stirring in the air, a rumor that Britain itself was debating the abolition of slavery. Word traveled slowly, carried by sailors, merchants, and whispers from neighboring islands. To those in chains, even a half-truth was a spark. The British Parliament had outlawed the slave trade in 1807, banning the transatlantic trafficking of Africans. For many, this seemed like the first crack in the wall of slavery itself. If the trade had ended, how long before slavery itself would follow? On the plantations, hope mixed with expectation. Workers believed freedom was already promised but being withheld by their masters. Planters denied the rumors with fury. They knew that if hope spread unchecked, their grip would weaken. Overseers punished those who spoke of change, determined to silence the idea before it became action. But repression only made the whispers grow louder. The enslaved began to believe their bondage was not only cruel, it was unlawful, unjust, and against the very laws of Britain. It was in this climate that Bussa and other leaders began to organize. Secret meetings were held in cane fields at night, in huts lit only by lanterns, in forest clearings where drums beat softly to cover whispers. These gatherings were dangerous. Discovery could mean death, but the urgency of freedom outweighed the risk. Bussa was not alone. He worked with trusted lieutenants, including women as well as men, who carried messages, organized supplies, and spread word across estates. The rebellion was not the plan of one person, but a movement woven together by countless hands. The plan was bold. On Easter Sunday, when many colonists would be distracted by church and celebration, the enslaved would rise. Cane fields would be set ablaze, symbolizing both destruction of bondage and the cleansing fire of freedom. Plantation houses would fall, masters would be driven out, a new order would be born in the ashes. For weeks, preparations moved in silence. Weapons were hidden, cutlasses sharpened, sticks carved, farm tools prepared to become arms. Men and women steeled themselves for the moment when chains would no longer define their fate. The risk was clear. The British garrison on the island was strong. Barbados was no isolated plantation, but a colony fortified by wealth and soldiers. Yet the enslaved pressed forward, knowing that even if the rebellion failed, its memory would live, proving that silence did not mean consent. The night drew closer. Easter approached. In the darkness, hearts beat with both fear and hope. The island stood on the edge of fire, and Bussa was ready to strike the match. Easter Sunday, April 14, 1816. The air over Barbados was heavy, the sugar fields shimmering in the heat of the day. Planters and overseers busied themselves with celebration, confident in their power, blind to the storm gathering under their feet. For the enslaved, the day was not one of prayer, but of defiance. The hour of rebellion had come. As night descended, the first flames licked the horizon. Cane fields burst into fire, stalks crackling as smoke curled into the sky. The blaze spread quickly, fueled by both dry cane and centuries of rage. The red glow lit up the island, a signal to all who waited. The time to rise was now. Enslaved men and women left the fields and huts where they had labored in silence. Cutlasses, hoes, and sharpened sticks became weapons in their hands. Drums pounded softly, then louder, until the night rang with rhythm and resolve. Across the island, thousands joined in, their voices and footsteps turning whispers into thunder. Plantation houses shook as rebels advanced. Some were torched, their walls collapsing into embers. Masters and overseers fled, their arrogance swallowed by fear. For a moment, the balance of power shifted. Those who had been treated as property now stood as warriors. Bussa moved among them, a leader in action, not just in name. His presence gave courage to the untrained and steadied those who faltered. His voice carried in the smoke and chaos, urging unity, urging defiance. He knew that once begun, there was no turning back. The rebellion swept through the parishes of St. Philip, Christ Church, St. George, and St. Thomas. The fires multiplied, visible for miles, painting the night sky red. To the enslaved, the flames were freedom given form. To the planters, they were terror incarnate. But the British were not slow to respond. Barbados was no quiet frontier. It was a crown colony, heavily guarded by militia and troops ready to crush unrest. As flames rose, so too did the march of soldiers, muskets in hand, cannons wheeled into place. The rebels pressed forward, but they faced trained firepower. Muskets spat flame, artillery boomed, and the cries of the wounded filled the night. Courage alone could not match steel and powder. Yet the rebels did not break easily. They fought, they resisted, they held the line longer than their enemies expected. By dawn, the island was a battleground of ash and smoke. Fields smoldered, houses lay in ruins, and bodies, both rebel and soldier, marked the price of defiance. The uprising had roared like a storm, but the empire was vast and its grip fierce. The rebellion would be crushed in blood, but in that night of fire, the enslaved had proven a truth that could never be erased. They were not silent, they were not broken, and they would not be forgotten. By dawn, the flames of rebellion lit half the island, but so too did the shadows of empire. Barbados was no unguarded colony. It was the fortress of Britain's sugar empire, and its militia was well prepared. Muskets, bayonets, and cannons were brought to bear against rebels armed mostly with cutlasses and courage. The British militia and regular troops moved with ruthless efficiency. Columns marched into the burning parishes, firing volleys into groups of rebels, scattering the untrained, cutting them down as they fled. Cavalry swept the fields, sabers flashing, trampling those who had dared to rise. For the enslaved, there was no retreat. Many had staked everything on this moment. Some fought to the last, swinging blades until muskets silenced them. Others melted into the hills, hunted by dogs and soldiers. Resistance was brave, but the imbalance of firepower was merciless. Within days, the rebellion was crushed. Over 400 rebels lay dead. Hundreds more were captured, rounded up in chains, and dragged before hastily assembled tribunals. Planters and judges wasted no time in handing down sentences. Barbados demanded blood, and the empire was eager to oblige. Executions followed swiftly. Dozens were hanged in public squares, their bodies left as warnings. Some were shot, others beheaded. The message was clear. Defiance would be met with terror. The guillotine, symbol of France's revolution, even appeared in Barbados, its blade meant to silence freedom once and for all. Bussa himself is believed to have fallen in battle, cut down during the fighting. No record tells the exact moment, but the legend says he died with weapon in hand, refusing capture, refusing submission. His death became part of the story, a symbol that leadership could be killed but never erased. The island fell silent again, but it was not the silence of obedience. It was the silence of grief, of rage, of memory buried deep. For the planters, the rebellion was a warning that even in their most fortified colony, the enslaved could not be kept silent forever. For the enslaved, it was proof that dignity could rise even in the face of cannons. Barbados returned to chains, but the fire had not gone out. The suppression killed bodies, but it could not kill the story. That story survived in whispers, in songs, in memories passed through generations. The rebellion had failed in the moment, but it had already won its place in history. The rebellion of 1816 was crushed, yet its memory endured. Though planters tried to erase it from the record, though colonial authorities reduced it to disturbances and riots, the enslaved remembered. They whispered the name Bussa as a symbol of dignity. His uprising proved that even in the heart of empire's strongest colony, freedom could not be silenced forever. The British claimed victory, but fear lingered. They tightened control, sharpened punishments, and increased surveillance. Yet they could not erase the truth. Thousands had risen, united, and struck against empire. No lash could undo what the rebellion revealed, that the enslaved were willing to fight, to burn, to die, rather than live endlessly in chains. In the decades that followed, rebellions swept the Caribbean. In Demerara, in Jamaica, in other islands where sugar stained the soil with blood, uprisings echoed Bussa's defiance. Each revolt, crushed or victorious, built the case that slavery was unsustainable, that empire's chains would one day break. For Barbados, the rebellion became a national memory. Bussa's name was carried through generations, a whisper in songs, a shadow in oral tradition. And when Barbados moved toward independence in the 20th century, his story resurfaced, stronger than ever. He was no longer just a rebel, he was a national hero. Today, Bussa is honored with statues and memorials. The towering emancipation statue, unveiled in 1985, shows him breaking chains, arms raised toward the sky. It stands as a reminder of both his sacrifice and the unyielding will of those who rose with him. The rebellion, once buried in colonial silence, is now written into the heart of Barbados's identity. Bussa's uprising did not free the island in 1816, but it planted seeds of resistance that grew into emancipation and, eventually, independence. His defiance became a torch passed forward, lighting the way for future generations to demand their freedom. This is the legacy of Bussa, a man born into bondage who rose against empire, died in battle, and lived on as a symbol that no chain can hold forever. This was the story of Bussa's uprising. This was the story of Barbados's fight for dignity. And this is forgotten history.